Hello and welcome at Book Lovers Companion. My name is Edith, and as you can see, as you might hear, dear listeners, no chattering teacup. I know, how many tea things can one person do? A lot, obviously. And she's also taking care of our furry overlord. As you know, life under the paw is what it is. But I have a wonderful guest with me, and I'm going to join her now. Here with me from across the bonds on the west coast of the United States is indie author, crime fiction author Ana Manwaring. Anna, hello and welcome at Book Lovers Companion.
Hello, I'm so glad to be with you today.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on. And after reading your book number 5 in your series, Backlash, Venom and Vendetta from NAM, which came out in December 2023, we have a lot to talk about, I have to tell you that. Really a lot. But before we get a bit deeper into your book, into your characters, what can you tell our listeners about your book?
Well, this book is part of a series, the Jade and Stone Mexico Adventures, but it's a different take. It's told by a different character who happens to be her father, her estranged father. And while the bulk of the series is told in the first person by Jade Ann, the protagonist, this is in the third person to indicate it's the father. And it is a new story about illegal gun sales in Mexico. I could tell more, but I think I'm going to be asked some questions.
You said it is written in third person, whereas the rest of the series is written in first person. So how did that feel for you as a writer to change this perspective, so to speak, completely, going from first person narration to third person narration?
Absolutely natural. It felt like it was exactly what this particular book needed. And it also helped me not fall into Jade Ann's voice. There were already 4 books, and I had developed this voice. So this kept me outside of that, and it seemed right for this particular character to tell it from his closely held point of view, but in the third person.
And some authors sometimes have trouble with first person narration because as a first person narrator, you can't be omniscient. Was that ever troubling you or not at all?
Oh, of course. I had to work around quite a few things because as author, I knew everything. And sometimes I wanted everything in there, but there's an easy workaround: dialogue. Somebody else can point it out, whatever, so that you don't lose your first person, the character learning right along with the reader.
And before we started the recording, you mentioned that you've lived in Mexico for quite a while and you're going back to Mexico quite recently in the coming days. What is it about Mexico that is so fascinating, and why do you think it is maybe even easier to write crime fiction with a setting in Mexico?
Well, let's answer that first. In my opinion, which may not be everybody's opinion, Mexico has become a narco state. It's built on crime. Right now, it's built on crime. My books, the existing books, take place in 2007 when the president, who was President Calderon, declared war on the cartels. So that's sort of the beginning of when it's not the beginning of the cartels, but it's when the violence blossomed or exploded, I should say. And so it seemed like a good time to be writing. So there's a lot of crime in Mexico. And that seemed like a natural. But why Mexico in particular, personally? When I was in sixth grade, we read a book that is probably no longer being read in the schools because the world has become very PC. But it was called Our Neighbors to the South. And it was all about Mexico. And, we learned about sombreros and donkeys and beans and rice. I fell in love with it. There was a story in particular about Popocatépetl and Ixtashihuatl, which are the two volcanoes towering over Mexico City. And the story is that he was a great warrior and she was a beautiful princess, and they couldn't get together, and something happened, and she went to sleep and turned into the mountain. And that's Ixtashihuatl, and it means sleeping mountain or sleeping princess or something. And I just was taken with this. And somehow, when I finally made it to Mexico, when I had just graduated from college, so that was in 1973, about, it was a magical place, and I had a great time, and it just never ended. Then my cousin married a Mexican and moved to Mexico, be naturalized in Mexico, raised 3 daughters. So I've always had a place to go and people to meet, and there you go. My love of Mexico has never waned whatsoever.
Yeah, but we learn in this book, in book number 5 in your series, that the past of your characters is not really in Mexico, because the main character of your story is Jade Ann. She is the daughter of an American father and a Vietnamese mother. And I got the impression after reading your book and after, watching documentaries and so on, that the Vietnam War, just like the Civil War, are those big traumas of the United States. Unlike World War I or II, they do not often feature in books as often as Vietnam or the Civil War. What is it about this war especially that is so, or was so traumatizing?
The Vietnam War started quietly for the United States when I was quite young. But by the time I was a teen, we were watching the Vietnam War on the evening news during dinner. It became, everybody in my age group was involved. Our boyfriends and our husbands, well, I was a little too young for a husband then, and our brothers and cousins were being drafted and going and dying. And it was, I started college in 1968, and that was when the country essentially erupted in that era, erupted in anti-war. It defined a generation, one way or another. And it's just something you can't get away from. And it was bad. It was wrong.
Mm. And you also mentioned, when you introduced this book to our audience, that we have a different main character, so to speak. It's not Jade Ann in this book, but it's her. Well, it's Jackman Quint. He's the main character in this book, and he has to deal with his past, or this past comes back to haunt him, more or less. Can you a little bit elaborate on that as well? Because without, of course, giving too much away.
Well, Quint's backstory is a little sad. He goes by Quint, but his first name is Jackman, and any readers will hear him being called both. But he joined the Army as a recent graduate. So he was about 21 years old, and he wanted to save the world from communism. That's not exactly how things went. He came under the influence of an NSA operative who was dealing drugs illegally, and Quint got involved. He did some things that weren't so great. He ended up in jail, and he spent some time in jail, dishonorable discharge. And he has spent his life, it's been about 32 years when the book opens. He spent his life trying to atone, but when he went to jail, he lost sight of his Vietnamese girlfriend, and he didn't even know he had a child. So that's kind of what's going on in the back of this. And Vietnam being such an important milestone of sorts for the United States, it made a lot of sense that this would be how he was separated.
And also the fact you mentioned those agencies. They feature a lot in your book because they are involved in all kinds of, shall we call them shenanigans? It's a nice way of putting it. And since you have lived in Mexico and so on, how huge, I suppose, from what I've read and it's quite huge, this influence of these agencies in Latin America. And it was, I think, given the history of America's meddling in Latin America.
And America is still meddling in Latin America. I don't know if it's good or bad, but a lot of it has not been good. And one of the operations that was going on, I believe it was a DEA operation. And of course, the DEA has been, what is that? DEA? I can't remember, but it's the drug agency. They have been meddling in Mexico since the 80s that I know of. One of the big things was the murder of Kiki Camarena, and it was a book I really encourage anybody who likes this kind of thing to read. It's investigative journalism. The writer dug deep, and it's all about the murder of this DEA, although I think it was called the BNDD in those days. It was his murder in Mexico as the Sinaloa cartel started to grow. I read that book when I lived in Mexico in 1991, and that pretty much put me on this trail. It was fascinating. So I can't remember the question. The question has to do with, these different agencies and kind of how did they get involved. I believe it was the DEA agency wanted to track, no, I'm probably wrong. What about the firearms agency? They wanted to track guns crossing or weapons, because they're not pistols necessarily, tracking the border, and they set up an operation where they were tagged so they could see where they ended up. It was a secret operation, and thousands of guns went across the border without them tracking them. I mean, it was a failed operation, and that's what I spun out of. Now, how do I know these things? I sat down and talked with a few people, soldiers from Vietnam, a man who I know worked for Army intelligence, somebody who I think he worked later for the NSA as well, although he wouldn't admit it. It's because it's secret, these secret things. So I learned some about the kinds of things that went on in Vietnam with drugs, with weapons, and then later about this operation. And I looked it up, and I used the operation as the reason Quint, or we think that's why Quint is in Mexico.
Oh, that would have been my next question, the question of research. How did you get your facts straight? You just said you talked to a lot of people.
I did. I talked to several people.
Okay. Yeah.
That's the but talking to people. So I had an old boyfriend who had been in Vietnam and who had some buddies, and we still talk to each other occasionally. And I called him up and said, "Hey, what can you tell me?" And he said, "Oh, come down to Ricky's, and we'll have a beer, and I'll have some friends there." And I interviewed 3 Vietnam vets at the bar at Ricky's. It was very fun. They had really good stories. So I got some firsthand knowledge. Nobody admitted that they participated in these nefarious things, but they all agreed my ideas were accurate because there was lots of news in those days about things going on. So I learned about packing body bags with heroin and, kind of how they were moving it out of Laos, and the drug kingpins from the other countries, and kind of what was going on. And then I learned about this, and you can go onto the internet and you can get information on pretty much anything. The secret is to always look for at least 3 sources. And if they all agree, you can probably believe it.
And how much do you enjoy research? Because we have a lot of authors who say, "Oh, I'm a research nerd. I love to research." And it might become a sort of rabbit hole for them to fall into, and they had to pull themselves out of it. Are you that kind of author?
Yes, I am. I do love my research. It took me 27 years to write the first book. And in those 27 years, well, I did a lot of things, but like going back to school. But I read extensively, taking notes, I did lots of research into the cartels so that I would have a lot of background. And yes, it is a rabbit hole. I got to enjoying it so much. I didn't really want to write the book. I just wanted to do the research.
Yeah, but was there ever that moment, researching into the cartels, was there ever a moment for you where you thought, "Oh dear, I might have to be more careful what I read or what I write," or is it just,
Well, when it's a book that you can pick up, I'll show you my Bible. For readers, for listeners, viewers, and you're interested, this book, Narcoland, by Annabelle Hernandez. It's in English. I don't know that it's in any other language. I cannot find it in Spanish. It tells you, of course, it's all about pretty much the period of time I'm looking at. It tells you who all the narcos are and all the government officials they're paying off and who are paving the way for this to happen. Okay, this is safe. I bought this book on Amazon, probably. Nobody's going to bother me. But the answer to the question is, you bet. I have two things. Number one, I did lots of weird internet stuff that easily could have put me in the eye of the narcos. And I know that the narcos kind of look at, well, I'm using a very broad, generalistic term here, but people watch. What's his name? The guy who wrote, it'll come to me. I'll tell that story later. The other thing is I found a blog called Blog del Narco. Viewers, please never look at this. It was horrendous. I was depressed for a year after watching them kill people live on video. No, there are a lot of really terrible things. Who is it? Don Winslow. That's who I'm trying to remember. He wrote the series. It's a series that started with The Power of the Dog. Then it went to El Narco. Then it went to, I forget the third book's name. And he had to change his internet and his telephone. His wife at home, while he was off doing something, was getting threat calls about the book because he was revealing things. They're fiction. So it could be scary. My husband mostly worried that my government would come back because I'm trying to look into things that just maybe the average citizen isn't supposed to be looking at. But I haven't ever had anybody do anything to me.
Good goodness, yeah. Thank goodness for that. Yeah, like you said, your own government. That's something crime authors often talk about when they say, "Oh, I'm researching, Google search for how to get rid of a body and so on," and you get nervous because police might come knocking on your door, and who knows? But it didn't happen. Okay.
No, and we hope that, they Google us first and they see crime writer, thriller writer, and then they go, oh, we don't care.
Oh, thank goodness for that. But you said you spoke to veterans about the war, and it's also a fact that writers often say people love to talk about. I mean, not veterans, of course, but in general, let's say people who work in forensics or police officers, they like to talk to authors about their experiences and set things straight. Let's put it that way.
Exactly. And I'm a member of Sisters in Crime Northern California, which is a chapter of Sisters in Crime organization, which is international now. I know there are a couple of chapters in Britain, Canada. I'm not sure where else. And every chapter puts on programs and gets expert speakers. And, we learn about craft, we learn about marketing, we learn about crime and crime prevention and all kinds of topics. So we've got a way to pick people's brains, experts' brains, and clear things up. But the one thing all the experts say is, oh, the books and the movies get it wrong all the time. And I'm thinking, yeah, why spoil a great story with the truth, right?
Absolutely true. Absolutely agree. And it's always funny to listen to them. Like you said, they have so many stories about, how and when and why to find a body and so on. And one story was absolutely interesting. A forensic anthropologist, she once said in a lecture, never get a dog. Get a goldfish, get a cat, but don't get a dog. Because dogs are usually the ones that find the bodies.
Oh, yeah, sure. The dogs will find the bodies.
Yeah, good
But
advice.
we find the bodies.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know that the crime writing is huge. It's second after romance in book sales. And I know that people like this because we get to read about things we don't know. There's excitement, but there are also many truths that come out. I don't know. I just think that crime shows us the underbelly of our humanness.
Absolutely. And I think crime fiction over the last, let's say, 10 or 20 years has grown exponentially insofar as it's a genre that is very open. You have different subgenres and you can essentially put anything in crime fiction. Let's say you can make it gory, you can make it cozy, you can, I don't know, go into the past, go into the future, whatever you like. It always works.
It always works. And there's always crime. It's not always a dead body. And I have dead bodies, of course, but it's not about figuring out who did it. It's about stopping it from happening again, which is essentially the definition of a thriller.
Yeah, absolutely. And may I also ask you, since we mentioned that the main character of the series is actually Jade Ann, who was born to a Vietnamese mother, where did that character come from? When did you meet her, so to speak?
Jade Ann was originally Laura, and she was Californian, but always adopted. I'm an adopted child. So I sort of play off of that. And there's certain bits to adoption, you go, unless you can find who your parents are, you always wonder. No, you can't help it. It's just natural. And I had wonderful parents. So, it wasn't like I needed to know, and I don't actually. Um, but I wanted somebody that had certain amount of doubts and a certain amount of not belonging. And I got to thinking, well, this has kind of been done. This isn't completely new or fresh. I mean, nothing's new, but it isn't fresh. I need a different spin. And I don't remember what clicked that off. It may have been I watched a documentary on the baby lift, on the fall of Vietnam and the baby lift, which was a program that was put on by Gerald Ford. Was it Gerald Ford? I can't remember. To lift orphans out of Vietnam as the Chinese, North Vietnamese were swooping down and taking over. And I went, oh, her mother was a college student. Her father was a serviceman, and the mother is killed. I learned various things. She dies in childbirth. She isn't killed, but well, never mind. She's dead. And I just really liked this baby lift idea. And each child was adopted by parents on the end, and they went to different cities. And one of the cities was Seattle, which of course is easy from the San Francisco area to go to Seattle and pick up your new baby. So she was a babe in arms and adopted by a lawyer and his socialite wife, specifically somebody who worked all the time and somebody who was busy, going to lunch and maybe taking, pills or something. Okay. That's sort of a cliche, but so that she felt not quite part of it. And shortly after being adopted, they had a child. And of course they had adopted because they couldn't seem to have a child. So this is part of what sends Jade Ann to Mexico. She's sort of trying to prove herself and find where she belongs.
Mm. Yeah, fascinating. And you as a writer, writing characters is one thing. Writing plot and description and dialogue is the other thing. What do you prefer most? Writing descriptions, writing dialogue, or could you not decide? Say they have both and all of them have their merits and...
Everything has their merits. My strength is description. I think I'm good at dialogue. Characterization is the hard part for me. Digging deep, pulling the emotion out, getting it on the page in a realistic way. We don't want info dumps. I could, I could say something like I just said, and there it would be, but it doesn't give you any feeling about
Yeah.
how the character feels. And I work very hard at that. And I have a great team of readers and a wonderful editor, people who really look for that. They know my weaknesses. But I've been criticized for over describing, going on for pages. You can't do that either. And I've learned how to pull it out so it's vivid
Mm.
without overdoing it, or I hope.
And how would you describe your writing process? Are you a meticulous planner, or do you go with the flow, or somewhere in between?
Well, let's look at my background. This says a lot about me. I sort of just do it. I'm a pantser. I get an idea. I know who my characters are. I know who my main characters are. And of course, in a series, that's pretty easy. Once you have your first book, you know who's in it. And I know who's going to die at the end, or I know how it's ending. So I have a new book in the works, and I'll tell you about that later. So I've got a guidepost pointing to the end of the book. But beyond that, I pretty much sort of make it up as I go. And there's a lot of stuff I have to take a lot out. I write much longer than is in the book. Because it's like my backdrop. There's this that interests me and that interests me. And, I've got all these colors and you can't see everything, but there's art all over and postcards and, so that is kind of how I work. And I'm not very good at sitting down at my desk and getting my work done. I sit down at my desk and I do my email, which might take all day, and I research, and maybe I talk with my ex-boyfriend in Mexico on WhatsApp. He and I are writing a book together. And, I do a lot of things. I might even go so far as to pull weeds or iron before I manage to get myself to the keyboard. Most of my writing gets done at night. I'm a night owl. And after I've done everything else, it comes. And it comes fast. And I get everything down. I'm going to get down, that I've been thinking about. I call it composting. And I'm not necessarily consciously thinking, then what happens? Then what happens? But I've got an idea, and I do my different things, and then it pours out. So that is my process. And I also do. Do you know that? You must.
Sorry.
Do you know what NaNoWriMo is? National Novel Writing Month.
Yeah.
I do that every November. So I'm working on my 7th book now. 5 of the 7 books are NaNoWriMo books that got started there.
And not really having a plan while writing.
Not really.
Does it help that this sort of process, does it help that your books are not police procedurals?
Oh, probably. That would take a lot more planning, I think, because there's so much more organization. I like the idea of the amateur. Jade Ann is the operating manager of a PI firm. And, she knows how to do some internet research, and she knows how to do a few things, but she's not a PI per se. She actually has a degree, an advanced degree in journalism that she's not using. And so part of her thing is she wants to write something. She wants to investigate and write when she gets to Mexico.
I read in the description of you as an author that you worked for a PI.
I did. I did. I was the accounting office for a PI, which is what I did before I went back to teaching. Teaching, then Mexico, PI, PI office before Mexico, then I came back to teaching again.
Mm. And you
And it was to go on cases.
yeah, true. And I also wanted to ask you about being a indie author. Was that the intention from the beginning when you started writing, or did it just, evolve in that direction?
When I started writing, I returned from Mexico in 1994 and I started the first book. And I started the memoir as well. And I still thought that publishing was you write a book, you send it to an agent, they're going to say, oh, this is the best thing I've ever read. You're going to be a number one, and you get your book sold to one of the big houses. And from there, you just sort of win awards or something. Well, this is not the way it works. And I've dated myself pretty well by everything I've said. When I had a book or two ready and I started querying agents, my top 5 wrote me really nice letters and made suggestions. And that was great, but they didn't take me on. And the other 30 they ghosted me. I never heard anything. It was demoralizing. And I was looking at retirement. Well, I didn't really retire, but I was looking at, collecting Social Security and decided I was way too old to wait around for the 100 or 120 queries for somebody to say, oh, yeah, I'll try and sell your book. So I self-published both Setup and The Hydra Effect. And then through Sisters in Crime, I met Lisa, who said, oh, no, you really need to talk to my publisher, who is Indies United Publishing House. And it's somewhat of a hybrid publishing, and it runs on a very different model. And I didn't need to have an agent. I needed to have a few good reviews and be willing to do some hard work. And we talked, we hit it off, and I'm in Indies and I'm very happy. I retain the rights to, well, of course, I retain the rights to my book, but I can use my own editor. I can use my own book designer, and I love my book designer. She's amazing and she understands it. She gets, I say, oh, I want a little of this and it's kind of about that. And, I've got some vague conversation and she pinpoints what I'm after. So I'm really pleased with my whole arrangement.
And looking at them right now on my other screen, I have to say she does a good job.
Yeah. My favorite of all the covers is the memoir cover, Saints and Skeletons. I don't know if people can actually see it. This one, the little house, it's called I'm forgetting what it's called. I'm trying to think of the Spanish. It's a little box, kind of a wooden box. And then in it is a Santa. And those are artifacts I brought back from Mexico. I took a photograph. I said, okay, here's the title. Here's what I'd like to see. And she pulled that together. And I think it's really effective.
Also the skeletons. I mean, this huge, let's say, cult around death and so on. It's a little bit Catholic, isn't it?
Oh, it's quite a bit Catholic, yes. Mexico is definitely a Catholic country.
Yeah.
I was raised in the Episcopal Church, which is what we would call it in the U.S., but Church of England. I find I'm interested in religious art, religious architecture, It's beautiful. It's got a lot of history. I'm one of these tourists who likes to go see cathedrals. And when I was in Mexico with my Mexican boyfriend, he liked to go to mass every Sunday. He was a practicing Catholic, of which he is not now. But um, so I had opportunities to see a lot of churches and cathedrals all over Mexico because we traveled all over.
Mm. And to be quite honest, nobody knows how to put on a show like the Catholics.
It's true. Exactly.
I mean, I'm speaking from experience here. And may I also ask you, what is your take on the difference in crime writing between the United States, let's say, and Europe? Because that's something I often talk about with a good friend of mine. And the differences you have in the United States, how you look at crime fiction and how it is presented compared to Europe, for example.
I don't know how it's presented in Europe. I would only know how it's presented, international, I'll call it international, is presented here. And of course, it's presented the way, I mean, at least it's announced the same way we get announcements anywhere. But I don't know. Ours, well, there's such a wide variety. You've mentioned genres. There's such a wide variety. There's kind of hard to pinpoint, but I have read many books coming out of course, England, because they're in English and I can read them. I can only read a translation, including Spanish. I'm not fluent enough to read a whole book in Spanish. So I'm reading translations, and it depends on the translator how accurately they're sticking to things. But it seems that the European, it's less about these more superstars that we might have in ours. Our characters often are sort of over the top. Not always. Now, I'm making a gross generalization. But the European books, mostly I've read spy novels. My father loved spy novels, and anything that made it into English and came into our house until I left the house, and even beyond, because we shared books until his death, I would read. And first of all, they would talk about war and Cold War and espionage differently than the Americans. We're more hero oriented and we're right. And it seems to me that a lot of the European stuff, there's a certain ambivalence in right and wrong. And I'm talking ideals. And of course, who's to say what ideal is right and what's wrong? It's what you believe. And I always found them very interesting. And I found the characters to be maybe more character-driven books than action-driven books. There's an American author who writes about Europe, Martel. I don't have his book handy. Dominic Martel is his author name. And they're all set in Europe, and they go all over, and they are sort of spy kinds, and they're fantastic. And they're so character driven. You are this character. You're living absolutely vicariously through him, and they're modern. So there's an older component, but then he started writing them again recently. So they're modern and with modern themes. And I like that. I like that a lot. Sometimes I get tired of small New England towns, or I wanted to say, or the cooking ones, but no, I love the cooking ones. And I'm sitting on a panel at Left Coast Crime in 2 weeks that it's called Are We Full Yet? And it's all about food in crime novels. So there's 4 different crime writers in different subgenres. It's going to be very fun.
I mean, food is always a nice topic. I mean, who loves to
Who does?
eat would love to read about it, maybe. And I mean, there are TV shows like The Great British Bake Off, and they are very successful. So food is always a good,
Now,
topic.
on our topic, I can compare a little better in the TV series. Like, let's look at Swedish crime series. They're gritty and they're dark. And of course, on TV, you may not see so much guts and gore, which I really prefer. And I know the British don't go, they eschew the guts and gore mostly. But they're super character driven. And I think we in the United States are starting to pull from this tradition and start making it be about the characters rather than the sensationalism. Um, and I like that. And I like the thinking. I like to try to solve it. And I like modern themes as well. But I don't need so much of shoot 'em ups, although I, of course, have those.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely agree. Yeah. And may I also ask you, what would be your advice for any other aspiring author out there?
Oh, well, this is a favorite topic. I teach creative writing still through a senior center. I left the community college and I went to a senior center. My students have always been retirees in creative writing. And people of an age have incredible stories. So first, think about if you're inclined to write, think about topics, fiction, nonfiction, whatever it is, poetry, it's all good. Right? When you come up to a topic and you feel a little effervescence in your veins, that's what you need to write about. Or if you feel that sort of fear feeling in your stomach, that's what you need to write about. Anything that creates a sense of emotion within yourself is going to be a good topic. So pick a topic that appeals to you and kind of turns you on in some way. And if you're afraid to write about it, you know that's what you need to write about. Then start jotting things down. Don't worry about anything. I mean, grammar, spelling, making a full sentence, don't worry about that. Just get ideas down. And when you're ready, take a class, get in with a group of people, meet other writers. If you don't like your teacher, if you get bad criticism and you feel like you've been put down, leave. Don't ever put up with that. There's no reason for it. And when you find the right place, you'll find a community and that will help. That's the biggest deal, is finding your community of like-minded writing people. And you can join clubs, you can do it through classes. Classes are good. You can take online classes, go to seminars online. There's a lot of ways to learn your craft. And of course, in between all these, go out and do things. Write. There's only one real way, and that is to write.
And don't forget to read.
And don't forget to read. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting to read. The more you read, the better you'll be. And some people say, oh no, I can't read because I might get ideas in my head. Well, literature is based on having ideas in your head. And just because you read something in a book and that sparks an idea doesn't mean you're being influenced and it's not yours. what you write is going to be completely different than whatever you read in the book. But don't plagiarize. That is a no-no.
Absolutely. And don't kill the dog.
And don't ever kill a dog. It's okay. You can do anything else you want. Although be careful with children. Maybe it's better. Can I say something about my next book?
That would have been my next question. What about your plans? What can we expect next from you?
All righty. I don't have anything to show you, but I've had the cover made, and the cover, it's called Kickback. It's set in Mexico. It's a new series. It's the Daphne Olavarrieta Mexico mystery, although they're still pretty much thrillers, and they're political thrillers. And in this book, when you look at the cover, because we were just talking about don't kill the dog and be careful of children, it's got a little bed and a backpack and a teddy bear and a Hello Kitty tennis shoe tipped over so you can't see the logo. Plagiarism or copyright infringement. And it's got a shackle, an ankle shackle. And the room looks old and awful, and there are bars on the window. Okay. So that tells you something. The inciting incident, the big event at the beginning, well, it's not always big, but the event at the beginning that sets the book in motion is a telephone call from Daphne's college best friend. Her daughter has been kidnapped. So it's all about getting this child back. And as Daphne digs and investigates, she discovers that there is a government scam to steal government money for a political reason going on behind this. So it's all about that. And I'm on my way to Mexico on the 25th of April. I can't wait. Where I will be meeting with my former boyfriend. This is so crazy. It's 31 years now later, he contacted me, and he's going to be my companion and driver in Mexico City while I go and research all the places I've never been that I need for this book. So I'm pretty excited. We're going to have a great time. And I wish my husband were coming. So, but unfortunately he's got a big job and will be on his own job. So I've got this week, and I'm really excited about this book and this story. And the story came out of a newscast. In the newscast, the journalist was kidnapped and threatened, not a child, but I'm twisting it to make a story. But the whole rest of it, of this government scam, is real. So, and that this series will be about political. So I'm going away from the cartels and I'm going to the politics. And the politics are probably even more interesting.
And maybe even more dangerous.
It's very possible I'm going to be introduced to maybe not, the candidate, the Xochitl. She has 3 parties backing her. The election is on the 2nd of June. And my friend has a connection to her, and it's possible that we're going to maybe be able to say hi and meet. She's the current government is, it's coming out. It's coming out now. It's narco driven.
Mm.
And Xochitl is not narco driven. So we'll see.
Okay. So Anna, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know?
I don't know. I mean, so many things. I just can't think of a cool answer to that. I hope that you read my books and you like them and you reach out. If you like them, send me an email. You can reach me through my website. there's a contact form, so that's easy. And my website is my name. So I'm easy to find, and keep reading. And everybody who wants to write, keep writing. Start writing and
I
enjoy.
absolutely agree. And dear listeners and those who are watching, you will absolutely enjoy the books as well. I can guarantee.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'm absolutely looking forward to this new series.
Good. Well, I hope it's good. I know as the more you write, the better you get. And I think the writing is good. I think the writing in Backlash is the best writing, but the stories are all fun.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely agree. So go out there and get the books, dear listeners.
Thank you so much. This has been delightful. Edith, it's great to meet you.
Same here. Anna, thank you so much for joining me, for doing this. And please don't go away. I will join you shortly in the green room.
Okay.
Dear listeners, we hope you did enjoy this episode as much as my guest and I did. And we hope you did tune in for the next episode as well. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you would like to support us, you can do so via Buy Me a Coffee, Ko-fi, and other platforms. And if you would like to become a Patreon and be an early bird and listen to our newest episode before everyone else, you can do so as well. Until next time.